2:47 p.m. local time. January 26, 2026. 13 Revolutionary Guard fast attack boats screamed out of Bandar Abbas Naval Base like hornets from a struck nest. Engines howling, crews armed with rockets and heavy machine guns, navigation systems locked on precise coordinates. Target: USS Abraham Lincoln. 104,300 tons of American nuclear-powered dominance cutting through the narrowest choke point on Earth. In exactly 47 minutes, these boats would be drifting powerless in international shipping lanes, their crews radioing desperate pleas for assistance from the very warship they'd just attempted to intimidate. What happened between 2:47 p.m. and 3:34 p.m. wasn't combat. It was something far more devastating. A demonstration of 21st century warfare where the fight ends before violence begins, where superiority isn't proven through destruction, but through surgical control of domains the enemy never knew they'd already lost. 72 hours. Earlier, Tehran. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei issued the ultimatum from an undisclosed location, his words broadcast across state media with calculated fury. American military buildup in the region had reached intolerable levels. The Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group approaching Iranian waters represented existential provocation. Any threat to the Islamic Republic will be met with decisive response, the statement concluded, leaving interpretation deliberately ambiguous. Behind closed doors, Revolutionary Guard commanders received clear tactical guidance. Demonstrate capability. Force the Americans to react. To create footage that would broadcast strength to Tehran's domestic audience and deterrence to capitals from Beijing to Pyongyang. The mathematics of leverage were brutally simple. 20% of the world's daily oil supply moved through the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, just 21 nautical miles separated Iranian territorial waters from Omani coastline. Shipping lanes themselves measured only 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. 1/5 of global petroleum flowing through a corridor you could swim across in heavy seas. If Iranian oil couldn't export, Revolutionary Guard doctrine held, no one's oil would leave. Oil futures spiked 4.3% on commodity markets within hours of Khamenei's statement. Insurance premiums for tanker transit jumped 17% overnight. Lloyd's of London analysts recalculated risk models, while Saudi Arabia and UAE quietly expanded surge production capacity, hedging against supply disruption. January 25th, 1,200 nautical miles southeast. The Abraham Lincoln transited from the South China Sea toward the Indian Ocean, gray hull slicing through moderate swells at 28 knots. Carrier Air Wing 9 operated continuous patrol cycles, F/A, 18E/F. Super Hornets launched and recovered every 47 minutes, maintaining 24-hour coverage of expanding operational radius. Destroyer Squadron 21 maintained defensive screen geometry. USS Mobile Bay, Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruiser with Aegis combat system integration, held position 12 nautical miles northeast. 4 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers formed layered perimeter, their SPY-1D phased array radars painting continuous 360-degree coverage out to 200 nautical miles. Inside the carrier's Tactical Flag Command Center, analysts monitored Iranian naval activity through classified intelligence feeds. National Security Agency signals intelligence detected increased Revolutionary Guard communications traffic. Naval vessels conducting unscheduled exercises. Fast attack craft conducting fuel and weapons loading at elevated tempo. They're preparing something, the intelligence summary concluded. Timeline: 24 to 48 hours. Authorization framework arrived from U.S. Central Command at 11:23 a.m., January 25th. Rules of engagement updated. Kinetic force authorized if carrier threatened directly within weapons release range. But authorization wasn't obligation. American commanders possessed other tools, capabilities specifically designed for scenarios where destroying the enemy would hand them propaganda victory. The doctrine they'd perfected Revolutionary Guard naval forces had refined asymmetric warfare tactics across 4 decades. Their doctrine was elegant in its simplicity. Overwhelm technologically superior adversaries through numbers, speed, and audacity. Swarm attacks, fast attack craft, Boghammer-class boats, typically 40 feet long, capable of exceeding 50 knots, bristling with rocket pods, and 12.7mm heavy machine guns, would converge from multiple vectors simultaneously. Saturation tactics designed to overwhelm defensive systems, force target acquisition splitting across too many threats, create windows for successful missile or rocket strikes against billion-dollar warships. It had worked before. At least the tactic bloodied larger vessels during the Iran-Iraq War, intimidated commercial shipping throughout the 1990s and 2000s, generated psychological impact through close approaches that tested American rules of engagement, probing for hesitation, weakness, gaps in defensive posture. Revolutionary Guard commanders believed they'd perfected maritime intimidation into operational art form. High-speed approaches, aggressive maneuvering, weapons systems openly displayed. Force Americans to either fire first, handing Iran victim narrative, or tolerate harassment that eroded deterrence credibility. But doctrine built on assumptions about adversary capabilities. Assumptions Revolutionary Guard intelligence services had catastrophically failed to update. 2:33 p.m., the January 26th. Surface search radar operators aboard USS Mobile Bay detected unusual activity at Bandar Abbas. Multiple small craft departing port simultaneously, speeds building rapidly. Formation geometry suggesting coordinated operation rather than routine patrol. Skipper, we've got 13 contacts departing Bandar Abbas on attack profile bearing. Speed 37 knots and climbing. Tight formation. Direct intercept course with carrier. The Abraham Lincoln was 47 nautical miles southwest of the Iranian coast, well within international waters, but inside the tactical engagement envelope Revolutionary Guard doctrine defined as optimal for fast boat operations. 2:38 p.m. The contacts accelerated to 49 knots. Formation split into 3 elements. Classic pincer approach, designed to divide defensive attention, and complicate targeting solutions. Abraham Lincoln went to general quarters. Damage control teams sealed hatches. Flight operations suspended. 5 EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft, already airborne on routine patrol, received new tasking. They'd been waiting for exactly this scenario. 2:47 p.m. and 11 seconds. 13 boats roared into open water. Crews young, motivated, trained in tactics they'd drilled hundreds of times. They saw the carrier group ahead, massive gray shapes against blue water. American arrogance incarnate. They believed they controlled this engagement. Speed, numbers, home water advantage, tactical surprise. Inside climate-controlled spaces aboard the carrier and its escorts, American operators watched different picture entirely. Surface search radars tracked every boat continuously. Fire control systems generated targeting solutions updated twice per second. Acoustic sensors cataloged engine signatures. Optical systems captured hull numbers and crew positions. The Iranians weren't attacking. They were being dissected, analyzed, understood completely. Every assumption Revolutionary Guard commanders had made was burning before the first boat crossed the 40 nautical mile threshold. 2:51 p.m. 5. EAPA 18G Growlers established electronic warfare patrol pattern 73 nautical miles from the carrier. Each aircraft carried 5 ALQ-99 tactical jamming pods plus next-generation jammer low-band systems. Combined, they could generate electromagnetic energy across frequency spectra from 2 MHz to 18 GHz, flooding Iranian radar and communications bands with interference precisely calibrated to blind without permanently destroying, at authorization transmitted from Tactical Flag Command Center. One word: execute. 2:54 p.m. and 23 seconds GPS signals vanished, not degraded. Gone. Satellite navigation receivers aboard all 13 boats lost lock simultaneously, coordinate displays freezing, then defaulting to error messages. Iranian crews checked equipment, cycled power, switched to backup units. Nothing. Radio communications degraded to white noise. Centralized command frequency, the channel coordinating all 3 attack elements, collapsed into static. Boat commanders attempted alternate frequencies. Same result. The electromagnetic spectrum they'd operated in for years had transformed into hostile environment, every channel jammed, every attempt at coordination absorbed into cascading interference. Compasses spun. Magnetic field sensors, I calibrated for Persian Gulf operations, registered readings that made no navigational sense. North shifted, then shifted again. Electronic compasses defaulting to backup modes that contradicted physical magnetic compasses, which themselves seemed affected by localized electromagnetic distortion. The boats still had engines. They still had speed. But they'd lost the invisible infrastructure modern naval operations absolutely required. They were 13 isolated units, each commander blind to others' positions, unable to coordinate, unable to navigate with precision, unable to confirm target location beyond visual sighting, racing toward American carrier battle group that tracked their every movement with perfect clarity. 3:02 p.m. inside combat information centers across the strike group. IDE operators monitored Iranian boat behavior with clinical precision. Speed profiles logged, course changes tracked, communication attempts cataloged and analyzed for intelligence value. They're still coming, one analyst reported. Speed holding at 48 knots, formation degrading but general attack vector maintained. The Abraham Lincoln and its escorts possessed authorization for kinetic engagement. 5-inch deck guns, rolling airframe missiles, explosive weapon systems capable of firing 4,500 rounds per minute, overwhelming firepower that could erase all 13 boats in under 90 seconds. But that would hand Iran exactly what it wanted. Martyrs. Footage of American aggression. Justification for escalation. There was more surgical solution. 3:07 p.m. and 34 seconds. EA-18G. Electronic warfare packages shifted parameters. Jamming intensity increased across navigation frequencies. Iranian boat engines, modern diesel outboards with electronic fuel injection, throttle-by-wire systems, GPS-integrated governors, began experiencing cascade failures. Not mechanical failures. Electronic disruption of control systems. Throttles became unresponsive. Engines cycled erratically between full power and idle. Fuel injection timing disrupted. Several boats lost power entirely, engines dying despite crews frantically working restart procedures. The electromagnetic environment had become toxic to anything relying on electronic systems more sophisticated than 1960s-era analog technology. 3:12 p.m. Lead Iranian boat, hull number visible to American optical systems as IIRGCN 847, came within 8 nautical miles of the outer defensive perimeter, close enough that crew could see carrier superstructure on horizon, close enough to feel psychological weight of mission accomplishment, close enough to realize something had gone catastrophically wrong. The boat's helm no longer responded to input. Navigation screens blank, radio dead, engine throttle frozen. The vessel continued forward on residual momentum and whatever minimal engine power inconsistent electronics still provided, but control had evaporated. Other boats experiencing identical cascade. Some drifting, some circling aimlessly as steering mechanisms failed to respond to helm commands. 3 had stopped entirely, dead in water, crews visible through optical surveillance attempting manual engine restarts. Not one boat maintained formation. Not one commander could communicate with others. Not one vessel operated under control of its crew. They'd become maritime debris drifting in one of the world's busiest shipping lanes. 3:17 p.m. From 31,000 feet, EA-18G Growler crews monitored the tactical picture through data link feeds. 13 Iranian boats scattered across 12 nautical miles of ocean, none operating effectively, several actively drifting into commercial shipping lanes where massive crude oil tankers, vessels displacing 300,000 tons, requiring miles to stop, plowed northbound and southbound through narrow corridors. The immediate military threat had ended. New danger emerged. Collision risk. Abraham Lincoln adjusted course, moving closer to stricken vessels. Not to engage, to assist. 3:23 p.m. radio transmission broadcast across all maritime frequencies, encoded for maximum clarity, transmitted in English, Farsi, and Arabic. Iranian naval vessels. This is USS Abraham Lincoln. You are drifting in active international shipping lanes. Multiple commercial tankers inbound your position. Without navigation or engine control, collision risk is extreme. Maritime assistance available upon request. Acknowledge this transmission. Silence. 10 seconds. 20. Then, tight voice, controlled but stripped of earlier confidence. American warship, our systems have failed. We cannot maneuver. We require assistance. The question itself was the answer Iranian commanders would spend months trying to hide from superiors in Tehran. 3:34 p.m. EA-18G Growlers reduce jamming intensity to levels permitting basic communication and navigation restoration. Not full capability, just enough for Iranian crews to restart engines, restore minimal helm control, establish voice contact with each other. Enough to limp home under their own power, escorted at safe distance by American helicopters until clear of shipping lanes. 0 shots fired, 0 missiles launched, 0 casualties. Just 13 Revolutionary Guard boats that had departed port 47 minutes earlier as coordinated strike force, now scattered and humiliated, their crews piloting vessels that had betrayed them at the moment operational success seemed closest. USS Abraham Lincoln resumed transit operations. Flight deck operations recommenced. F/A 18 Super Hornets launching and recovering in routine cycles as if nothing had interrupted regular schedule. To casual observers monitoring commercial ship tracking systems, nothing remarkable had occurred. Carrier Group continued southbound through Strait of Hormuz. Iranian patrol boats conducted exercise, then returned to port. Surface calm. Beneath, strategic earthquake. Hours later, global ripple footage of the incident, captured by American surveillance systems and selectively declassified, circulated through intelligence channels within 6 hours. Not publicly released. shared with allied militaries, defense attachés, strategic analysis centers. The message required no narration. Iranian boats, drifting helpless. American vessels maintaining defensive positions. Radio communication, where Revolutionary Guard commanders requested assistance from the warship they'd attempted to intimidate. Oil markets responded before sunset. Initial volatility collapsed into stability as traders reassessed Hormuz closure risk. If Iran couldn't disrupt a carrier strike group without firing a shot, they couldn't credibly threaten to shut down a corridor moving 1/5 of global petroleum supply daily. Prices eased 3.7% in same trading cycle. Insurance premiums normalized within 48 hours. Shipping traffic continued without pause. January 28. Tehran 3. Revolutionary Guard commanders, names withheld from public records but documented in classified assessments, received administrative reassignments, not publicized. No official announcements. Just quiet removal from operational command to administrative positions with no tactical authority. Iranian state media made no mention of the incident. No martyrdom narratives. No defiant statements about standing up to American aggression. The silence itself spoke volumes to intelligence analysts trained to read gaps in propaganda as loudly as explicit statements. Like Supreme Leader Khamenei's next public address, delivered 72 hours after the Hormuz incident, focused on domestic economic reform and religious observance. No threats against American military presence. No ultimatums about regional waters. The rhetorical temperature had dropped 40 degrees without explicit acknowledgement of why. Behavioral changes were measurable. Revolutionary Guard patrol patterns shifted. Fast attack craft maintained distances exceeding 15 nautical miles from American vessels. Aggressive maneuvers, the close passes, the sudden course changes designed to test reactions ceased entirely. Encounter frequency dropped 64% across following 3 weeks, documented through CENTCOM operational logs. This wasn't treaty or formal agreement. This was recalibration born from revealed capability gap. Tactical humiliation absorbed privately. Doctrine quietly revised to account for asymmetries that doctrine hadn't anticipated. What Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang saw intelligence services in potential adversary capitals studied the Hormuz incident with microscope precision. Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy analysts, Russian General Staff strategists, North Korean military planners. They saw asymmetric warfare doctrine, refined across decades, celebrated in military journals, demonstrated in exercises, reduced to irrelevance in 47 minutes without kinetic engagement. They saw electronic warfare capabilities that didn't just jam communications, but could render modern vessels operationally helpless, crews unable to control their own boats, reduced to requesting rescue from intended target. They saw constraint. American forces possessed overwhelming kinetic superiority, but chose surgical demonstration over destructive engagement, achieving strategic objective, deterrence restoration, without casualties, without escalation, without propaganda ammunition. The demonstration was more unsettling than destruction would have been. Destruction proves firepower. Surgical control proves dominance across domains most militaries still treated as supporting capabilities rather than decisive battle space. The doctrinal lesson, fast attack craft swarm tactics, depended on assumptions that seemed reasonable until tested against cutting-edge electronic warfare integration. Assumptions about navigation reliability, communication security, electronic control systems immunity from external interference. Is Revolutionary Guard doctrine had been built. When GPS jamming was theoretical concern, electronic warfare meant radio interference, and throttle-by-wire engine controls didn't exist on fast attack craft. Technology had evolved. Doctrine hadn't caught up. The gap between assumption and reality measured 47 minutes from confident departure to helpless drift. American military investment in electronic warfare, EA-18G Growler fleet, next-generation jammer development, integrated electromagnetic spectrum operations, had created capabilities specifically designed for scenarios where kinetic response would be strategic defeat. The Strait of Hormuz became proof of concept, not theoretical. Operational. Wanijend. The geopolitical calculus in the Persian Gulf had shifted with mechanical precision. Were Iranian threats to close the strait, rhetorical weapon wielded for decades, source of regional leverage, tool of economic pressure, lost credibility overnight. Not because American officials issued warnings or made counter-threats, because Revolutionary Guard naval forces had demonstrated inability to execute even harassment operations against prepared adversaries without systems they couldn't protect from non-kinetic attack. If fast attack boats could be rendered helpless before reaching weapons range, Iranian mine-laying operations would face identical vulnerabilities. Shore-based anti-ship missiles depended on same GPS and communications infrastructure that had collapsed in 47 minutes. Even ballistic missile capabilities, Iran's conventional deterrent crown jewel, relied on targeting data flowing through networks now proven penetrable. Tehran still possessed military capabilities, but the cost-benefit analysis of using them had fundamentally changed. Saudi Arabia quietly canceled plans to expand emergency oil reserve storage facilities designed to cushion supply disruption. UAE announced new liquefied natural gas export contracts, assuming uninterrupted Strait of Hormuz access. Kuwait revised defense budget priorities away from anti-access scenario planning. Regional states betting their economic futures on Iranian naval forces being unable to deliver on closure threats. Betting backed by 47 minutes of electronic warfare demonstration that revealed asymmetric doctrine's brittleness when confronted with asymmetry in different direction. 3:34 p.m. That day nightfall came to the Persian Gulf as it had for millennia, to sun setting across water that had witnessed empires rise and fall, naval battles that reshaped history, technologies that transformed warfare across generations. To mariners watching from commercial tankers, the day had been routine. Carrier group transiting south, Iranian patrol boats conducting exercises, standard operations in crowded waterway. But beneath the surface, measured in electromagnetic spectrum control, in systems rendered helpless, in assumptions destroyed, the strategic balance had shifted with tectonic finality. The mathematics were undeniable. 0 shots fired, 0 missiles launched, 0 casualties. Yet the impact measured in commodity prices, insurance calculations, diplomatic posture, behavioral modification, and sudden reluctance of military commanders to repeat tactics that had functioned for decades. But this wasn't dramatic battle with explosions lighting up horizon. It was something more consequential, more permanent. 47 minutes. In that compressed time frame, Iran learned that threatening to close the Strait of Hormuz was no longer show of strength demonstrating regional leverage, but strategic gamble with no safe exit. Bet placed against adversary holding capabilities they couldn't counter, couldn't escape, couldn't even fully understand until boats they'd trusted were drifting helpless in shipping lanes requiring rescue. 21st century conflict decided before violence begins. Dominance established not through destruction, but through demonstration. Wars won by the side that controls domains the enemy never knew were battlefields. Electromagnetic spectrum, satellite navigation infrastructure, electronic engine controls, had the invisible architecture modern operations required to function. The Revolutionary Guard thought they were making statement that January afternoon broadcast of strength designed to intimidate American forces, domestic audience, regional observers. They were right, just not the statement they intended. The statement, American electronic warfare capabilities delivered with surgical precision. We can end your operation without firing a shot, leaving you alive to contemplate the distance between doctrine and reality, between assumption and capability, between what you thought you controlled and what you've already lost. Epilogue: The Invisible Revolution. Military analysts at U.S. Naval War College published studies 6 weeks later, classified but circulated among Allied defense establishments. Like the Hormuz incident became case study in electromagnetic spectrum dominance, reference point for discussions about non-kinetic warfare, proof that investment in capabilities dismissed as supporting systems had matured into decisive strategic tools. The revolution in military affairs everyone had predicted would involve hypersonic missiles or artificial intelligence or swarming drones had already occurred in electronic warfare systems, invisible to cameras, undetectable to observers, leaving no wreckage to photograph or casualties to count. Just boats that stopped responding to their crews, systems that failed at critical moments, confidence that evaporated like morning fog when confronted with capabilities traditional military thinking hadn't prioritized, hadn't understood, hadn't prepared to counter. The 47 minutes between 2:47 p.m. and 3:34 p.m. on January 26, 2026, didn't change warfare. They revealed that warfare had already changed, and most militaries still operating under doctrines written for previous era, assumptions built when GPS was civilian convenience rather than military necessity, when electronic engine controls didn't exist, when electromagnetic spectrum was medium for communication rather than battlefield where wars could be won before violence began. Tehran learned. The question remaining was how many other capitals would update their doctrines before conducting their own 47-minute education in the difference between assumption and reality, between what doctrine promised and what technology delivered, between threat and actual capability. The Strait of Hormuz, 21 nautical miles at its narrowest point, choke point for 20% of global oil supply, a flashpoint for regional tensions across generations, had witnessed yet another lesson in naval warfare evolution. This time, the lesson was invisible, electronic, surgical, and absolutely devastating to anyone whose doctrine still assumed control over systems they'd already lost. What happened in those 47 minutes wasn't the future of warfare. It was the present, demonstrated with clinical precision against adversary who discovered, too late, that the battlefield had shifted to domains they couldn't see, capabilities they couldn't counter, and strategic reality that made decades of tactical refinement irrelevant in the time it takes to order lunch. The boats limped home. The crews would never speak publicly about what happened. Iranian military doctrine would quietly revise in classified documents no Western analyst would read for years. But the message had been delivered, not through fire and fury, but through silence. The silence of systems failing, communications dying, confidence evaporating. The silence that follows when you realize the war you thought you were fighting was already over, decided in electromagnetic spectrum you couldn't see, lost before you knew the battlefield existed. 47 minutes. That's how long it takes to rewrite regional strategic balance without firing a shot, to render decades of doctrine obsolete, to demonstrate that in 21st century warfare, the most devastating weapon isn't the one that destroys, but the one that controls. And control, the 13 Revolutionary Guard crews learned as their boats drifted helplessly in international shipping lanes. Moose had already shifted to the adversary who'd been preparing for this exact scenario, while Iran perfected tactics for previous war. The future doesn't announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives with the silent hum of electronic warfare systems operating frequencies most people don't know exist, achieving objectives. Most military commanders still think require violence, ending threats before they materialize through capabilities that redefine what power projection means in an era where battles are fought in electromagnetic spectrum before missiles ever launch. That's what happened between 2:47 p.m. and 3:34 p.m. The rest is classified, or doesn't need saying, or both.